think as the youngest person, I'll go first. Before I go any further, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I stand on here today, the Wiranto people, and all of your elders past and present. But I also too would like to acknowledge all of my elders past and present and everyone in this room, for it is you guys who have laid the footsteps for me to follow in. And hopefully one day I can create the footsteps for the ones that come after me. So thank you guys. Bit about myself. I'm Indy Clark. I'm a 24-year-old muddy man and a ladle man. On my father's side, I'm a Edwards and Briggs. So I actually have descendants back to the Polawa tribe too. My great-great-grandfather was Manalagina, one of the resistance fighters in the Tasmanian tribe. So I sit here today. I'm very proud of that. And one of my uncles in Mildura has a saying that we should sit here like a phantom rooster, with our chest held high for everything that our elders have been through. To be able to sit here in front of you guys and be able to talk and share my story is all thanks to those guys. So I'm very grateful for that and very humble for this experience. Firstly, before I go any further, I just want to give a big round of applause to Adele and everyone that's put this conference on. It's amazing, so I think they deserve a round of applause. But yes, back on to me again. My father, sadly, Peter Clark, I come from a big family on father's side. He was one of 11. His mother was one of 13 and his dad was one of 11 as well. So we always have a joke in Victoria. If I ever wanted to, get with a black woman in Victoria, I've got to do a full background check because the chances are I'm normally related to him. So that's always fun for me. So it's good to come to a conference where I feel a bit out of my zone and don't really have that many relatives, so this is a bit comfy for me. But yeah, for my life, I grew up with my mother and my father, and sadly, my mother comes from her ladle mob in Mornington Island, but she was born in Perth. And my mother's a very strong woman. She's my rock, she's my stone, and keeps me in check plenty of times, and I wouldn't be the man I am today. But it's all thanks to her, the man I am, and it's all thanks to my dad. I grew up with a life of compassion and empathy, and that's something they instilled in me, that we don't judge our people, we don't judge anybody, because we're all human, we all come from the same earth. And that's something I carry with me today, and I try to preach that around here and there. But sadly, my dad passed away when I was 7 years old, and yeah, that's something that really hit home, but he still walks with me every day of my life and still somehow finds a way to guide me through to this day, and it's all thanks to him that I stand here today. And my mother had to be my father and had to be my mother at the same time in those years following, and she had great help by a lot of my scary uncles. As I said, Dad was one of 11, so had many of good talks with those guys, and I've had some pretty amazing people in my life that have helped me become who I am today. But I grew up in Melbourne. I was born in Melbourne, grew up there for 4 years, and then we decided to make a move to Mildura because all Dad's family was there, and they decided they kind of wanted to bring me up in a small country town, probably a bit more family friendly. So we grew up there, and thankfully went to school with all my cousins and stuff, and it was really amazing, really loved it. And yeah, went to school through there. Some sad things happened with Dad passing away and stuff like that, and powered through that, and thankfully to my mum and being the strong person she is, we got through them stages. But in 2006, I was asked to be a part of the Indigenous performance of the Commonwealth Games. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, and I was just like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, let's do it. And that consisted of travelling to Melbourne every single weekend to rehearse. And if you know where Mildura is, it's at the northwest of Victoria, so that was a 6-7 hour bus trip every weekend on a Friday, go rehearse Saturday and Sunday, and then bus trip home, and then go back to school. And that was a bit of a struggle. Every Monday I'd wake up, argue with Mum, wouldn't go to school, and yeah, it was pretty fun. But we made a decision that we would move to Melbourne. As a 16-year-old boy, Mum gave me the option. She said, oh, do you want to move to Melbourne? And obviously, as a young man, who doesn't jump at those opportunities? And I moved there. And for me, this is one part where I really started to consciously see racism. I went from a high school at Mildura that was 120 other Indigenous students with myself to a school with my cousin in Brunswick Secondary, one of Joe's cousins as well, Jaden Williams, and there was three of us, three Indigenous people. So for me, that cultural shift was amazing. I went from a school where I was, part of the mob, part of my family, we were all brothers and sisters, to a school where I was, the minority, bigger than I'd ever been before. I remember walking in, it was a really big school that had a heavy ethnicity of Lebanese and Somalian, and I remember walking in and getting called Oi Abo, Oi this and that. But thankfully to my mum and my father, I was brought up, like I said, the education and awareness is the key to a strong community. It's the key to survival in today's world, thankfully. It's thanks to my ancestors that I can do that. I don't need to fight fights with my fist anymore. I can fight it with my mouth and fight it with our voice. And it was through that, it was just kind of telling them, that's not right. You say that to another brother boy down the street, you might get put to sleep. And it was through that two-way communications that, I learned that I'm not supposed to sit there and call them Lebos, as they weren't supposed to sit there and call me Abo. But for me, that was a really, really, really big shift, and it really opened my eyes and made me appreciate what I kind of had in Mildura, and how big and diverse Melbourne can be. And for a little black boy, that can be pretty scary and confronting. But again, I had a pretty strong support system in my life that kept me through it. And 2 years later on, pushed through school there. It was pretty fun. But we had a lot of struggles, me and the brother boys, and constantly have arguments with the boys and push through it. But that was, one thing I like to preach, and I'm pretty glad for this talk that was before, is I believe in our Aboriginality as our power. It's not something that, the media always talks about it being negative, negative, negative. When I think of Aboriginality, I think of it as my power, as my resilience, as my leadership. And that's something that pushes me through to this day. And that's, we should stick our chest up like Pan and Roosters, because that's what we've got to teach our young ones. And that's one thing that I always do in my line of work, is keep preaching to our young ones that there's no need to be ashamed no more. We've got the opportunities where we can stand here and be proud of our culture, be proud of who we are. And it's through that life that I've been able to do that. But something that hit me is I moved back to Mildura in 2009. My little sister stayed in Mildura, and so did my mum, and I'd go back to Mildura and I'd see how much my little sister was growing up. And we're 6 years apart, so that was the time when she was going through primary school, and you'd go home, you'd see that she wasn't this little girl anymore, she's starting to become a big woman. And that for me was heartbreaking. I'd go back home to Melbourne and I'd nearly cry myself to sleep and deal with racism, wouldn't have my mum there, wouldn't have that support system that I really, really needed to have. So I ended up moving back to Mildura, and this is where I kind of started my journey to where I am today. So I went back to school there, and as a young Indigenous man, this is something where we kind of struggle with, the cultural loads that are put on us. I was just a young man having fun, smoking, your weed, doing drugs, being stupid. But I got dropped out of school, didn't like school anymore. It wasn't for me. I didn't believe in the education system. I don't believe that, all students get taught the one way that a student learns. I think we need to go back to a basis and teach kids the way they're supposed to be taught. That's about getting to know them. I'm getting hurried up in time here. But gladly through that, I dropped out of school, had some people that really kicked me up the bum, like my mother, the likes of Uncle Richard Franklin, who's one of my mentors and family friends, and some of the elders in the community kicked me up the bum. And my dad was all about education. He did a lot for Indigenous education, especially in Catholic ed. So that was always ringing through my ear. And this is where spirituality has come for me to know about this and the consciousness. I've only realised recently that that's something that carries us through. And I always had this deep warming in my heart that I had to go back to school. So I went back there, and that led me to where I am today. I got a job at Optus, started there, and that's where I probably started to deal with some mental health issues. And sadly, through that time, I lost some brothers and sisters to suicide. That was a spate where Mildura probably had 6 or 8 in the spate of about 9 months. And for me, that was a really, 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 really tough time. I never spoke to anybody, never really talked to anyone, never talked to my partner at the time. Us men, we always bottle stuff up and we need to talk it out, and I never did. Really took to me, came depressed, put on weight, was about 160 kilos in the end, and gladly I had another sit down with my mother and my godmother, and they're the ones that always used to lecture me. The strong women in my family would sit me down and have a chat, and they kicked me up the mum, and that's what brought me to Madass. I had a chance to go to Madass as a corporate services trainee, took that opportunity, and Rudy, our CEO, says sometimes you have to take a step back to take a step forward, and I look at that chance as the time I did that. I went from a 2IC at Optus to a trainee again, and thankfully it's led me to the work I do now in the community engagement field, working with youth, which is something that I dearly love, and I love, that fact of teaching our young ones culture. I've got a big belief that, it's about embracing our culture and sharing it, even though that young one might not be from my tribe. It's about teaching him that culture that I know and making him, preach it and dance it and share it, but respectfully, and acknowledge that. And thankfully I'm at Madass now, but I better hurry up. But I do some amazing work, and I love what I do. It's for my community, and it's the real passion that lives within me. I got to facilitate some youth workshops 2 weeks ago at the Crew Youth Summit, which, when you're at a conference like that, it's 180 deadly young Indigenous people having a voice, having a say around issues like this, and one was getting help to feel okay and connecting to someone important. And for me, this is why I'm pretty passionate and took this opportunity. I think our youth need to have a voice. What we have needs to be shared, and what we have does count. So that's one thing that I'll challenge people with today, and it's one thing I challenge our young ones with, is it's our time to take the footsteps of the elders, and it's our time to create the footsteps for those that follow us. So thank you guys, and I'll answer any questions soon.
Hello, my name's Tracy Jerry. I'm from Charters Towers. I'm a Kudgala woman. Charters Towers is in Queensland. Now, talking about suicide, I went through this little community that I grew up in, and it was really, really bad. I was called everything but a woman, or everything but a person. And you got to the stage where you think that your life is over, because you think, what is God here for? Is he here to help me, or is he here to hindrance me? And if it wasn't for me getting out of Charters Towers, and I moved to Sydney, and that community helped me through to make me the woman that I am today. And I thank God and the community of Sydney to make me the woman that I am today. I have had 60 odd children through my care, black, white, brindle, Chinese, redheads, you name them, I've had them all. And they all call me mum. And that's so lovely. I'm in my 50s, but this is my blonde streaks coming through. And I think if it wasn't for Charters Towers making me who I am, and Sydney, I wouldn't be here today to sit down and talk to you all, and it's a great honour to sit here with all of you. So thank you, that's all I can say. I can't go any better than this baby.
Hello everyone. Is that okay? Is that loud enough? Yeah. Yep. Okay. Just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're sitting today and talking about these very, very serious matters. I know the group that I was with earlier this afternoon, we really got stuck into the really hard stuff. And I thank them for taking the time to come and listen and share with me some of their thoughts and experiences, and also share the burden. And I think that what we all have to do and recognise is that racism and suicide is a burden that we all have to carry and share together to lighten the load on each of us. My experience comes from some 30 years of being a clinician, working with children and families in mental health services, and more recently working in a specific Aboriginal mental health service, as well as working in a university program where we were trying to graduate Aboriginal people to become doctors and go back to their communities. My recent work with the Royal Commission has given me a whole other insight into how children are treated and discriminated against, and we've now done over 5,000 stories. We have still 1,500 people on the wait list. In fact, it never gets less than that. So clearly we're only just scratching the surface of the many, many stories of children and their experiences in this country. In terms of the experiences of some of the Aboriginal kids that we've heard from as adults, the levels of racism that they experienced certainly created a much worse situation for them. So they experienced often a worsening of the trauma just because they were Aboriginal. And clearly being in some of those missions or institutions or orphanages under the legislation that operated throughout Australia meant that they really didn't have any rights at all. Their parents had no rights. The community that they were from had no rights. Nothing could do anything about their particular situation. When you strip a child of all of their rights and you put them in a place where people are going to denigrate you and break you, then awful things are going to happen. And it's not surprising that we're now hearing the very tragic and sad stories of what happened to our children in those places. Racism isolates and alienates people from everything around them. It creates an other that is inferior. It creates a sense of inferiority in the child itself, which often is a lifelong experience that they can't ever shake, particularly when it becomes very entrenched from early childhood. Racism is incredibly damaging, and yet we see it every day, and we still don't tackle it. So often it goes unnoticed. When I've been working in health services myself throughout my career in medicine and mental health services, sometimes people don't even see it. They don't even know what it is. I was a bit of a novelty because I'm somewhat fair-skinned, although I'm Aboriginal, and people don't always know that when they come to see me. And so they don't always know that when they speak about or they denigrate Aboriginal kids or patients in front of me, they think I'm going to agree. They have no idea what they're going to cop when they start. In fact, I'll tell you one story about an experience when I was a training registrar, because it's always stuck with me. I was sitting in the office. We were all having lunch. I just started at a new service, and I was the psychiatric registrar in a mental health unit. And all the staff were sitting around chatting at lunchtime. And this particular staff member was talking about how disgusted she was because her nephew was going to marry an Aboriginal girl. And all the staff were laughing. And this conversation went on, and I was sitting there just listening. And eventually this particular staff member said that she was still going to go to the wedding though, because she wanted to see what the Aboriginal mother looked like and what she was going to wear. At that point, I just quietly got up and said to all of the staff sitting there, well, I can tell you this, my Aboriginal mother came to my wedding and she just looked like everybody else. And I left. Fortunately, because I was actually the doctor and they were all scared of me, I think, I got an apology, and the staff were really quite concerned. But more to the point was this, no one said anything. They didn't even think it was wrong, and it went completely unnoticed. If that's what they thought was okay, then how do they treat the patients? How do they manage the families that come into their care if that's the attitude that they have? Unfortunately, racism is a difficult thing to tackle if we don't see it. So we have to make it visible, and I'm not sure quite how we do that, because we have many examples and we have many good programs to deal with racism, and yet it's still pervasive particularly in our systems of care, and it's particularly prominent in health. When we looked at the WA Aboriginal Child Health Survey, which the data's a little bit old now, but it's from around 2000, isn't it, Adele? Is 2000? Racism featured prominently as being associated with self-harm attempts in young people. So if you'd experienced racism, then you were far more likely to experience a self-harm attempt. So we know that racism is directly linked with suicide attempts and possibly completed suicide. I think this is what happens. Once you have a reduced child to nothing, to being something of the other, to being inferior and unworthy, then you can disregard their humanity. Once you disregard their humanity, you no longer see their distress. You no longer have to look at their face. You no longer have to hear their voice. But not only that, you can also blame them for what happens to them. That's what racism does. It's the worst possible experience for a child to have, because it allows the complete disregard of them as people and as worthy citizens of this country. I don't know what we do about it because we've been tackling it for years and years and years, and yet it's still there. I guess it takes more of us to be in the systems so that we can stand up, like all of us have done, I'm sure, at times, and say, hold on a minute, I'm here. You can't say that. You can't do that. It's everyone's responsibility to say no to racism, and it shouldn't have to rest on the shoulders of our children. Thanks.
How are we going for sound? Is that all right? Can you hear me? Everyone's just looking at me like blank face. I'm like, guys, my name's Joe Williams. I'm a Wiradjuri man I was born in Cowra but raised in Wagga Wagga. I guess for me, as a kid, I always knew, I always had dreams like every other kid to be a professional rugby league player. I was lucky enough to be able to go down and do that and spend about 10 years in the NRL system down in Sydney. And then before, in 2008, when I went through a bit of a change of direction in my life, and the old man was an amateur boxer, so I thought, I grew up in and out of boxing gyms, so I thought I'd try my hand at it. But it wasn't the fact that I walked into a boxing gym and I wanted to fight, because by no means was I an aggressive person, and as a rugby league player, I was probably a soft person. But for me, the one thing that helped me so much is that when I walked into a boxing gym and started hitting the bag and challenging myself in the boxing gym, the noise in my head starting to quiet down. So I knew for me, so the days I walked into the gym, I didn't want to be a boxer. I just kept turning up because it quietened down the noise that was going on inside my head. I was training at a gym at Redfern PCYC in Sydney, and a fairly famous boxing trainer named Johnny Lewis. He trained Costa Zua and Jeff Fennick and those sort of guys. Johnny threw me in with one of his professionals just as a bit of a test, and I went okay. And he said, I think it's time to give up rugby league, mate, and come and have a go at this sport and see how you go with it. So all of a sudden I went from a guy that just went to train to quieten down the noise that was going inside my head to having my first professional bout without any amateur experience. Lucky enough for me, I had a fairly successful rugby league career and then a boxing career where I won a couple of WBF world titles and a few other different titles as well. But it was learning to be a boxer was the one thing that counteracted my mental health problems. For as long as I can remember, I'd always had suicidal thoughts. I just thought that this sort of thing was natural. I thought that the voices inside people's heads were that everyone got. I thought that the voice that told me I wasn't good enough to play in the NRL, the voice that told me that I wasn't good enough to stand in a line next to people because I was just a little Aboriginal boy. I thought everyone had that voice. Later in my life, obviously, I delved into a bit of the education around mental illness and what I have, and started to realise that not everyone feels like this. So for me, I went about a journey, and after I finished playing rugby league, during my rugby league career, I had a fairly extensive drug and alcohol problem. Now that was because that was the only thing that quietened down the noise inside my head to start with. Then December just gone, it's been 10 years since I've touched any drugs or alcohol, and but I still battle that burden today. You notice with the function that or the types of things we have, like when there's alcohol around, I just slip out and be by myself because I get still after 10 years that addiction process still goes through my head. And I got to the point where I'd walked away from rugby league, I had a marriage breakdown, I'd reparted, and then that breakdown as well. All of a sudden, my entire life I wanted to be the best father I could be. but I was separated from both my ex-wife and my new partner, so I wasn't living with any of my kids. When you get told enough, not only by them, but they had their reasons why they did it, but and the voices inside your head that tell you you're not good enough, you start to believe it. In 2012, I had an attempt where I did absolutely everything I possibly could to not be here anymore. With that suicide attempt, I wrote letters to my kids, explaining that I'm sorry I couldn't be the father that I wanted to be, and I'm sorry that I couldn't be the father that I promised them I would be. But if they ever need me, knowing that growing up with that blackfella spirit, I'll always be around. So I wrote that note, and then I attempted and did what I had to do to not be here anymore. But thankfully, I'm still here. And after a mental health ward stay and some medication and so forth, doctor said to me, you're lucky to be here, kid. You better do something with your life. So in that moment, I guess I call it my epiphany or my moment of clarity. I made a promise to myself that every day I open my eyes, I'm going to make a positive impact on somebody's life. And for me, I've been lucky enough that through my sport, the profile of being a sports person, I relate to a lot of people and a lot of kids. And I get to go around now and travel and deliver my education workshops, The Enemy Within, because that's, I've boxed for world titles, I've played on the NRL, which is arguably the toughest sport in the world, and nothing compares to the enemy that fights me every single day. Nothing at all compares to that. I've had teeth knocked out, and I've been knocked out myself, but the constant battle that I have with myself inside my own head, nothing compares to that. So I started with Suicide Prevention Australia's help. I started The Enemy Within. Now, where I go out and I speak to communities, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, all different sports clubs and schools and so forth, right across the country. And then I've recently been I've developed a relationship with a guy called Kevin Hines in America, who's a Native American man who struggled with identity his whole life because he was adopted. But he struggles with bipolar as well, and we've got quite a few similarities. But he attempted by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco has, a 98% chance of non-survival. Kevin is one of 4 people that have gained full mobility. And I travel now overseas and work with Kevin in Native American communities as well, because I've found after conversations with them, it's direct mirror image to what we go through here with, government oppression and society's racism and so forth. It's like looking in the mirror and talking to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mob across there. I was at a conference recently over there in Las Vegas, and an old auntie grabbed me and she cuddled me and she said to me, "You get it. You know what our people go through because yours go through the same." And that was so. It was. I spoke to one of our cultural uncles back home, and he said, "Doesn't it feel beautiful to be connected culturally right across the world?" And that was, that was the really important, special thing for me. In regards to racism, yeah, I've copped my fair share throughout life, on the footy field, by parents, even in the boxing ring, by people in the crowd and so forth. Not often to my face, because I know how to look after myself with my hands a little bit, so they don't often say it to my face. But the way I was raised, I guess I was raised fairly resilient. My father said to me, he said, "Son, whenever somebody calls you a black so-and-so, last time you checked in the mirror you were. So be proud of that." And for me, I'd rather be called a white, I'd rather be called a black so-and-so than a white so-and-so, because they can't dance, they can't play footy, they can't do all that sort of stuff that we can do. But the one important thing for me is that I've had a bit of a roller coaster life with my bipolar and having the ups and downs through sport and so forth. That's also gone into my personal relationship life. So I've got 4 children and try and keep up with it to 3 different mothers. So I've got 2 in Sydney, 1 in Wagga and 1 in Dubbo. So I do a fair amount of Ks in the car. But Look, some people might know, I made some headlines earlier in the year around the January 26th, Australia Day. I was named the Wagga Wagga Citizen of the Year, and when they had the national anthem, I refused to stand up. Because me, as an Aboriginal man, I believe that song doesn't represent me. It's a song written during the White Australia policy. It's a song written during the White Australia policy about England by a Scotsman. Now tell me, go figure, if the people realise what it's actually written about, they'll start to understand themselves. But for me, the one positive thing that come out of that, out of all the racial hate online that come out of that, the one positive thing is that my 4-year-old boy, he gets burnt under a kitchen light. He's that white. He's fair-skinned with red hair, bright red hair. And, you know, when people say, when he walks with me and he says, "Oh, Dad, let's go and do some blackfella stuff," like all the white people walk around going, "Ooh, who's that little white kid talking to that Aboriginal man like that?" But his mother, we had a really difficult time when we were together because she just didn't get what we were about. When I tried to go out bush, she was always asking who's there and what's going on out there and he's drinking out there and what girls are there and all that sort of stuff. And non-Aboriginal people just don't get the cultural connection that we have to the land. So sometimes we have to go out and we have to be there, right? So the one positive thing that come out of all of that Australia Day crap was out of all the racial hate online, she called me up and she said, "You know what, Joe, now I see it." You know, and my little boy, I don't care how white he is, but he's going to stand as tall and as proud as he possibly can to be a black man. So that's the one positive thing that come out of it for me. I'm just really honoured to be here and sharing my stories and interacting with so many powerful people from right across the country. And like I said, I'm really honoured to be here and hopefully getting to talk and interact with everyone and learn from as many people as possible throughout the weekend, because let's not forget, as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we're something like 6 times more likely to die by suicide than non-Aboriginal people, and it's even higher for women at 7 times. You know, it should be a national tragedy, but we've only got to get our government to see it. So we've just got to be the loud voices that we can be. Thank you.